We're starting Be'ezus Hashem Hilchas She'elu Upikadon. And we discussed this in the beginning of Hilchas Chirus. The first halachas in Sefer Mishpatim is Hilchas Chirus. And over there the Rambam mentions the Dalit Shemrim. The Dalit Shemrim is a Shem Bechinam, a Shem Sachar, and a Seicher, and a Sheil. And nevertheless, the Rambam really in Hilchas Chirus only discusses the Seicher and the Shem Sachar. But the Rambam in Hilchas Chirus doesn't only discuss Hilchas Shemrim. Over there he discusses all Hilchas Chirus. Side the din of a Shemer Sachar, side the din of a Secher, side for the Secher of Behemoth, side Secher Adam and a Peil, and a Secher Abayas, and a Secher Asada. All the dinim of Schiris are all discussed in Hilchas Chirus, including the halachas of a Shemer Sachar, and al derazeh of a Secher legabi the Hilchas Shmira. Hilchas Secher legabi all kinds of other dinim as well, but also legabi Hilchas Shmira. Now in Hilchas She'elu Upikadon, here the Rambam is going to discuss only a Shemer Chinam and a Sheil. So he divides like the two Shemer of Shemer Sachar and Secher are discussed in Hilchas Chirus, and the Shemerim of a Shemer Chinam and a Sheil, they are discussed in Hilchas She'elu Upikadon. And we mentioned that possible that the Rambam, when he divides the halachas, in Hilchas Chirus is two people having a dealings with each other which involves money. You're hiring someone, or you're hiring a behemoth, or you're hiring a field or a house. It's all dealings between two people which involve money. Masha'inkin al derazeh shemer sachar and a secher. Masha'inkin Hilchas She'elu Upikadon is similar in the fact that there's no money exchanged over here. A she'ela is the pshat is that you're borrowing something for no money, and al derazeh Upikadon means someone you're depositing something by someone, and that person is watching it without money. So that's how the Rambam is dividing these in Yonim. Hilchas Chirus, which is dealings which is connected to money, and Hilchas She'elu Upikadon, which are dealings without money, possibly. Now, Hilchas She'elu Upikadon, yesh bechlolon shtei mitzvahs. Rishena is din ha-sheil, that's the halachas of the sheil, and shniya, that's the din of Shemer Chinam, which the Rambam calls a pikadon. Ubir b'tzuseila b'perkamelu peirik rish. Ha-sheil keli oy behemu kiyetzven. Mish'ar metaltel michaveri. Now this din of she'ela is a din of metaltelin. Is a she'el keli a behemu kiyetzve mish'ar metaltel michaveri. And va'avad enignav afilu nanas enus godul ken shenishbra behema enishbis a mesa. So the din is chayiv l'shalom akil. So that's the din of a she'el. A she'el, when a person is she'el metaltelin, so then he's chayiv not for gnevin aveda and even for einus. Shnamar v'chiyishel ishmim reyehu v'nishbar imes and ba'ol v'einim meishal mishal. So there's a chiyav tashlumin. A sheil has to pay even for einsun. B'medvar mamurim b'shenanas shalei b'shas malacha. That's only it was nanas shalei b'shas malacha. Aval imshal behema mechaveri lachrish bo umeisa kishehi chireshes is harezu potter. Now the Lashon Rambam is that it was Mesa Shalei B'Shas Malacha or B'Shas Malacha. There are some Rishonim that learn that the fact that it was Mesa B'Shas Malacha is not a reason for a P'tur. It's only a reason for a P'tur. It was Mesa Machmas Malacha. Whereas as a result of the Malacha, it was Mesa, so then it's Potter. Masha'inkin, if it wasn't as a result of the Mesa, the Malacha, but it was only during the Malacha, so then there's no P'tur of Mesa Machmas Malacha. Masha'inkin, the Shittas Rambam is that even if it was not Machmas Malacha, but as long as it was B'Shas Malacha, that's also a P'tur. That's the Rambam saying. B'medvar mamurim b'shenana shalei B'Shas Malacha. If the Einas didn't happen while he was working with it, then he's chayiv for einsin. Avul mshol behema mechaveri lachrishba umesa kishehi chireshes. While he was chireshes, it wasn't mesa because it was chireshes. It could have been mesa because lightning struck it. So in Mele was an oinus, but the pale was b'shas k'shi chireshes is a reza potter. Aval a mesa kedim shiachrishba. If he was mesa kedim shiachrishba, a yachasher charishba, so then he would be chayiv. Or another situation would be that he was sheil a para lachrishba, and lepel he was rochav Allah or dashba. So in other words, he did something which he wasn't sheil for. So really, he has a din of a shalech yad b'pikadon. Normally, Shalei Yad B'Kod means he doesn't have a right to use it. But over here, this Sheil did have a right to use it. But he only had a right to use it Lachrishba. And he went ahead and he was Rachav Allah Idoshba, Umeisaba, Kshi Idosha, B'Shas Rechiva, even if it was kshidosh b'shas rechiva, and certainly if it was afterwards. So the din is areza chayiv l'shalom v'chein kol k'etzim b'zeh. So notice the din is nachamal, that a person that a shayl is chayiv even for einzim. Then there's a ptur if it was mesa b'shas malacha, but that's only the malacha in which you were shaylit for. Masha'enken, if you were shaylit for, let's say, charisha, and lepel you were rachav ala doshba, so then it was mesa, then you're chayiv. Because lepel you were a shleach yad b'pikot. V'chein hashel behema mechavere leilach bo lemokim pleni, umesa tachtav beisi aderech. So while he was doing the work, it was mesa tachtav. Esha shal dli lemalis bei. He borrowed a pail to be malisbeg, which had a rope attached to it. V'nikra beber b'shas mili, while he was working with this pail, which for what he borrowed it for, it got torn and got lost. Oy sheshol kardum, he borrowed an axe lefatzel ba'etzim to chop wood, and v'nishbar, and it broke be'esha potzel bei, while he was chopping the wood, machmas habikua. So here the Rambam adds the words machmas habikua v'chol kiyetzabei hareze potter. While shalishal elalasis bei malachazu, knows the she'ela was for this malacha v'harei leishina, and memela. So there, since he was leishina, so therefore he's potter because it happened b'shas malacha. Now the Maisa is, we mentioned before that the Rambam seems to say that as long as it was mesa b'shas malacha, even if it wasn't machmas malacha, if it was b'shas malacha, he's also potter, which is different than other rishenim that learn that it has to be dafke machmas malacha, maybe pashtus hagimara, that it has to be dafke machmas malacha. So lefiza, there's a shtehar over here that in the case of the shol kardum, the Rambam says that the nishber be'esha pitzel bei machmas habikua. What does it have to be machmas habikua? L'chura, since he's doing the malacha, even if it wasn't machmas habikua, lepel, it got lost while he was doing the malacha. The Maisa is that there is a Tshuvas Rivosh that says that B'Amashitas Rambam is not really different than the other Rishenim. That he also holds that it has to be Machmas Malacha. Just if it happens B'Shas Malacha, we could assume that it was Machmas Malacha. But that's not the pashtus of the Lashon Rambam. The pashtus Lashon Rambam is the Rambam is being like Mechadish, and the Achreinim are mefalpel in Divrei Rambam. That the Rambam is being Mechadish, that it has to be dafke, that even if it was b'shas malacha, not machmas malacha, you also potter. So therefore you have to understand why is it taka that by the case of that he borrowed a kardum lefatzel bei, so the Rambam adds the word that it was pitz, that it happened nishba be'esha pitzel bei machmas habikwa. But I'll call upon him, that's the din. Is nachmal hashel is chayav on oinsim. If it happened during the malacha, he's potter, and the Rambam gives you a few cases of situations where it happened during the malacha. It happened during the malacha. Halacha beis. Hashayil behema mechaveri umesa. And the toan hashayil shebishas malacha mesa. The meila his potter is imhoya mokim shishal leilech bo. Mokim shebnei adam mitzuyim sham. Whereas he borrowed it to use in a certain place, and in that place there are people there. Is yavi raya shemesa, oinensa b'shas malacha, and v'lei shinaba be a potter. So he should bring a raya. He should bring edim that they saw it, the behemoth died, or was nensa b'shas malacha, and v'lei shinaba and be a potter. However, v'imlei hevi raya mishal, like we learned before, that in a case where it's a place where there is edim, is a place of edim, so he's not believed with a shvur, he has to bring edim. However, shalom imenu l'malis but v'tei churvase she'ein edim mitzuyim sham. Whereas the she'ela was to bring it in a place where ein edim mitzuyim sham. Eshe shalom imenu dli l'malis be'v'tei beisei, and lepel was nikra be'ber. It was nikra in the bear in his house. Is that it may be raya as you potter off mishvur. However, v'imlav yishol ashel shvuas hashemim shemesa mishas malacha v'yipotter v'chein kol kietz b'zeh, which is similar to the din we learned in Hilchos Chiros. In other words, when something occurred which is a ptur, he's claiming that something occurred which was a ptur. So if it's in a place where he could bring edim, so then he has to bring edim. Masha'enkin, if it's in a place where he can't bring edim, so then he's not mechuyev to bring edim, and he could swear. Obviously, if he brings edim, he'll be potter, like the Rambam says clearly. If he brings edim, he'll be potter. But if he doesn't bring edim and he swears, he's also potter. Halacha gimel. Hasheil keli mechaveri v'nishmar. And lepela got broken. is shamalei kederach sheshamalei nezokin. In other words, he doesn't have to replace the item. Just like when a person is mazik an item, so it's not sure he has to replace the item. All he has to do is reimburse him for the loss of money that he has from a whole item to a broken item. So the same thing applies to a shell. You borrow an item, so that item still belongs to the original owner, and now if something happened and you're chayiv, so you're chayiv just to reimburse him for the difference of what it was worth originally to what it's worth now. That's this thing. Hashel keli mechaverim nishbar shamalei. So you assess what it's worth right now. Kederach shishamal nezokim, just like you're shaman when you do hazik. Aimdim kamo yishav shalim. How much was this item worth when it was complete? V'kamo shava ata, and how much is it worth now? Umazili akeli abehema shvurim. So he gives him back the broken pieces of mishalim abchas, and he pays him for whatever it became worth less. The behema dies, is marzer hanavela, so the shoyl gives back to the mashal the nevela, and then a mishalim abchas, and he pays whatever. Whereas a nevela is worth obviously less than the original live animal, so the difference between the price of the live animal to the price of the nevela, that's what he has to reimburse the baal habehema. Halacha dalet. Hashoyl behema chayiv b'mzeiniseh mishor shemoshcha ad seif yimei sheilosa. There's a shayl is borrowing the animal, but he has a chiyuv to feed the animal. He has to feed the animal from when he's moishel the animal until he finishes the shayla. The imkichesh psar, if lepel it became thinner, and it's no longer as fat as it was originally, so it's obviously worth less. So then chayiv l'shalom ashepichas midomeh, because it was his obligation to feed the animal, to see to it that the animal should at least maintain its weight. Now kochash psar machmas malacha. In other words, he was feeding the animal very well, but lepel, the animal was working, and as a result of the work, it was kachash psara. So then it's potter, because lepel, he borrowed it to work, therefore he had a right to work, and if through this work that called kachasha, so then he's potter. Then he's potter. Kachash psara machmas malacha potter v'yishav shvuas hashemim shemachmas malacha kachash. However, he has an obligation to have a shvuas hashemim. In other words, he's tying a taina which is going to potter him from the fact that it became worth less. Is taina a taina? If it's true, he's so that he's taking out mechuyev, but he has to swear to the fact that that's what happened. That the reason why it was kachasha wasn't because he didn't give it to eat, but the reason why it was kachasha is because of the work. Halacha hey, hashoyel mechaveri keli behemastam. In other words, they didn't make up any specific time. He says he borrowed a keli or a behema. So Memela, since they didn't make up any specific time, Ariyamashal Machziri B'chalei Shiyirtz. In other words, the behema belongs to the owner. It's just that you have a right to use it. He lent it to you. So as long as he's letting you use it, you're allowed to use it. But you don't really have any specific kinyan for a specific time. However, Shalil Lizman Kotzav, if they made up clearly that he's borrowing it for a specific time, is Kivan Shemoshech, as soon as he made a Maisa Kinyan, V'zochabe, he was Zoich in the schus of the Sheila, Eina Bailam Yechelin Lachzirim, B'tachas Yodi, the Bailam can't take it back. In other words, the Sheil has Kinyonim in it, Kinyoni Sheila, Ad saves Man HaSheila. Va'afilu Mes HaSheil, even if the Sheil died, is Arei Yorshim, Mishtamshim B'Sheila, Save Hazman. So the Yorshim are Mishtamshim with the Yerusha, at Save Hazman, just like when a person buys something. So then it goes over to the Yorshim. So if a person has a schus of she'ela on something, so that schus of she'ela goes over to the Yoshim. That's what the Rambam says. V'dinu halikeach is doch keina. Notice this. The Seichel says this. Halikeach is doch keina aguf kinyanela b'dom mishnasan. When someone buys something, so he acquires the item because of the money that he gave, and al der is a mekabel matana. Someone that's a mekabel matana without money is kana aguf kinyanela v'leinasan klum. So the same thing, the parallel of someone that buys something and someone that gets a matana, the parallel is someone that rents something and someone that borrows something. No, v'hasecher is kana guf leperesav as man kasav b'dam shenasad. Someone that rents something is like a moicher, like a koina, but he's not koina the guf. He's only koina for a man kasav. He's koina the guf leperesav as man kasav. And al derazav hasheil is kana haguf leperesav as man kasav v'linosan liklum. So the borrower also is koina. So no, just like a makabel matan is koina, the shayl is koina, and therefore, since he was koina, so therefore the mashal can't take it back, and al derazeh it goes over to the children. Now, kshem shanesin kemecher shein yochel lazar leilam, just like someone that gives something is the same thing like a seller. And The Rambam is like saying the chidush kilu, that someone that's a shayil and he took it for his man kotzov, and we're saying that it's going over to the children and the mashal can't take it back. In other words, he just lent it to you. So we say, yeah, he lent it to you. But just like when a person gives someone a matana, he can't give it back. So al derech is that when you lend something, so that's giving a matana, lizman kotzov. And this idea, shayil, is similar to a seicher. Just like a seicher is renting this item lizman kotzov. So the same thing as shayil is borrowing the item for zman kotzov. Shem shanesin kemecher. Just like someone that gives something is like a mecher. Sheini yochel lazer leila. So a matana is similar to a mechira in the sense that the noisna matana can't have charata. Is kach hamashul kimasko sheini yochel lazer b'techazman. So the nekudas advarim is that there is a kinyan sheila, and that kinyan sheila, if you make up a certain time for the kinyan sheila, so that kinyan sheila gives you the right that the mashul can't take it back from you, and it also gives you the right that the yarshim this kinyan sheila. Now, hiniach lem aviyam parashula. A person borrowed a para. Now, he had a right to use the para, and he was also chayav b'insin, and it went together. In other words, he lent him the para. He had a right to use the para, and he had a chayav b'insin. Now, the yarshim are yarshning the rights to use the para. So the Shitas HaRambam is, not everyone agrees to the Rambam, other Rishonim argue with the Rambam, but the Shitas HaRambam is that the yarshim yarshin only the rights to use the para, but the chiyuvei oinsim that the father had on the para, that they don't have, that they never accepted upon themselves. So in other words, other Rishonim holds it's a package deal. There's no such a thing. There's the whole schus of ishtamshus only works together with a chiyuv oinsim. Mashenka, the Rambam holds you separated. The children aren't mechayiv b'oinsim. Why? That's this din, because the lepil they never accepted themselves einstein. There wasn't there as chayvus, even though they have a schus ha'ishtamshus. That's din number one. Now dimu shehi shalavim, the father died and there was a para there, and they thought it was their father's para. They didn't realize it was a borrowed para, and lepil v'tavchua they shechted it v'klua. So the din is mishalmed mei basar brazil, because since they thought that it was theirs, so they have to pay the mei basar brazil, which is a third off of the regular price. So then is Shalman is domer min nechasim. So even though the Rambam said that lepel the children aren't mechuyev in the einsim, in other words, they're talking about mechuyev in the einsim from their own nechasim. But on the other hand, when the father took the item, so he became like mechuyev to return the item b'shas ma'aseh. So lepel, if at the end this item was never returned, so it's not pshat the chiyuv is chal later. In other words, the father took the item Rish Chedesh Nisan, and lepeil the father died Rish Chedesh Ir, and the behemoth died Rish Chedesh Sivan. So lepeil it died b'rshus haYarshim. So the fact that it died b'rshus haYarshim is not mechayiv the Yarshim. The Yarshim have no chiyuvim; they would never makabel chiyuv oinsim. But on the other hand, lepeil, since the father took the item Rish Chedesh Nisan, and the deal was that he has to return the item. And lepil now this item is not being returned because there was nenas. So mele lemafreya, the father owes this money back. So it's not a chiyuv on the yorshim; it's a chiyuv on the father. The father owes this money back already from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, because that's the pshat in the shale over here, that the chiyuv is chal lemafreya on the shale from b'shas ma'isa. So therefore, if lepil the father left nechasim, so mele those nechasim are mishchuyev to pay back their father's debt. They don't have a new debt. In other words, if something happened in their possession, even though they have a right to use it, but they're not going to have create a new debt. But on the other end, the mafreya, since this item was never returned, so the father has the debt. And if the father left nechasim, so he has to reimburse. This nechasim has to be paid. That's this din. The so it comes out from here that lepel, the shale, doesn't become mechuyev while the oinus occurred. The shale works lemafreya b'shas the sheila. So whenever it becomes a shaila, the lechura is a din. L'mashal, if the shale went ahead and shechted the behem on Shabbos, so the din is that the shale is potter. Why? Because lepel is kamli b'drabminei. Lepel, the shale, when he became mechuyev through shechting the behem on Shabbos. So Memele there was chayiv misa, and Memele while you're chayiv misa, you're mechuyev in mammon. So Memele you can't be mechuyev mammon to chayiv misa together. So the question is good. Einachinami, for the fact that he's killing the behemoth now, he can be chayiv mammon. But now we're saying that l'chura he owes the mammon l'mafreya for b'shas hash'ela. So what does that have to do with kamli b'drabbanei? That's l'chura anudin. No, since the Rambam over here is saying that the chiyuv goes back to mafreya from b'shas hash'ela, and therefore, even though an oinus occurred by the yarshim, so lepel, if the father left nechasim, yet you could take from the nechasim because it's kilu the chiyuv was chal b'shas when the father borrowed the para. So how could Kamli ibn Rabban take off this chiyuv? And knows how could the Rambam paskin that Kamli ibn Rabban takes off this chiyuv? So that's an issue which is discussed in the Achrin. Halacha vav. Hasheil keli mechavere lasis bei malacha plains. He borrowed it to do a certain malacha. So he said clearly, I'm borrowing it for a certain malacha. He didn't make up a time. We said before, we had two cases. We had a case where he didn't make up a time, so then the mashal could take it back whenever he wants. When he made up a time, so then the shayl has a right to keep it for that time. Just like when a person gets a matana, he has a right to keep it. So when a person gets a matana for a certain time, he also has a right to keep it. Now what happens, they didn't make up a specific time, but they made up a specific work. Is Ashayel Keli Mechavere Lasid Be Malacha Plainus, is Eina Mashal Yochel Achziri Metachas Yodei, Ad Shiyasa Beis Malacha, until the Shayel does that Malacha. V'chenim Shal Mimenu Behema Leila Bo Lamakan Plaini, he made up clearly that he's borrowing the Behema to go to a certain place, is Eina Yochel Achziri Miyad Ashayel, Ad Shiyela Bo L'Sham V'yasa, until he goes there and he comes back. Because that was the deal. The deal was I'm borrowing it for this purpose. So he has to go there and come back. And at that point in time, that's when the mashal can ask for the para back. Halacha Zayin. Ha'imel lechavere hashileni kardon laderbe. Kardon we translated before as an axe. It could be a spade. And laderbe is to hoe with it, which means to soften the ground in the area. Ha'imel lechavere hashileni kardon laderbe. Laderbe hapardes hazeh, this particular orchard. So the din is oiderbe oisei hapardes bulvad. So since he borrowed it to hoe this orchard, so therefore he could only hoe this orchard. He borrowed it for this orchard, not for another orchard. However, he didn't specify which orchard he wants to hoe with it. He just said pardestam is oides by pardes echod, it should say ezeshiyirza. Because he said one pardes, he said a pardes, he didn't say pardesim. So therefore he's oide by pardes echod, whichever one he wants. Now shader lader be pardesim shalei. He didn't say this pardes. He didn't say one pardes. He says to hoe my pardesim. So then oider be kol pardesim shalei. So you go ahead and hoe with it all his orchards. Va'afilu nishchas kol barzel ba'adira. Even while he was doing this adira, doing this hoeing, so it ruined the whole spade, the whole metal. Nevertheless, marzle anatzav shalei. He just returns the handle. Because he borrowed it, and that was the purpose of borrowing it, and he had a right to use it until it was finished being used. Now, halacha ches, Hashem mechaveri keli lehishtamesh bei. Va'amar le hashileni davar pleini bitei vascha. So there's sometimes where you say, do me a favor and lend me something. The Rosh points this out. When a person says, do me a favor and lend something, so l'chura, so every time you say, do me a favor and lend something, lending is a favor. Over here, the chiddush is that he didn't say, do me a favor, lend me, but rather, hashileni davar pleini bitei vascha. So he means, lend it to me, and bitei vascha means more than regular lending. Kolemer, so the Rambam teaches, what does bitei vascha mean? Einat mashali davar zekeder kol hamashilum. Every hashal is a favor. But over here, I want you to lend it to me bitei vascha, elekvitei vas lipcha v'nedivuscha. And what does that mean? She'einat makpid al azman imarach. In other words, I want you to lend me something, and I want you to do it through your generosity, and that would be that you're not being makpid how long I'm going to have it. Is imkonu miyad hamashal. Normally, every sheil makes a kinyan. The sheil is a kinyan, makes a kinyan in order to borrow it. However, over here, to make this tanai, that the hashal is not stam hashal, and normally the mashal could be able to ask for it back. But rather over here it's going to be that the mashal can't ask for it back. You need an extra kinyan. That this tanai, there was a ma'aser kinyan on the mashal from the mashal. So then is a shel mishtamish be'leilam. The shel could use this item le'ilam ad sheyebatel hakeli belasis malachti, until the keli could no longer do what it was able to do, and then v'yazal ishvarav ishyorav. So then he gives it back either the broken pieces or whatever it's left, but it's no longer usable for its original use. He can't use these shvarim and rebuild it. In other words, he borrowed the keli and he said b'tevascha, which means that you'll never ask for it back. You'll wait till I use it as much as I want to use it. Once I use it as much as I want to use it and it's no longer usable, so then I have no right to take these shvarim and rebuild it. So that's certain limitation that the shayl has. Now, lend me this sheikish almayim. Sheikish almayim is like a tub of water where the behemoth drinks from. And Venersa and Lepel, this sheikish was broken. It fell apart. So it's again, Eini Yochel of Nesa. He knows he borrowed this sheikish almayim, and you're allowed to use it as a sheikish. But now the sheikish got broken. For you to rebuild the sheikish, since you said sheikish zu, I'm borrowing this sheikish, so you have no right to rebuild it, which is similar to what we just learned, that even if you was b'tevascha, but you have no right to rebuild it. V'chein kol kietzav is there. However, he didn't say sheikish zu shalmayim. Amale hashileni sheikish tam. Lend me a sheikish. A sheikish is again a keli in which the behemoth will drink the water from. And v'hishiloi sheikish, and he lent him a sheikish. And Venersa, and then the sheikish fell apart. So since he didn't say sheikish zu, he rather said sheikish. So then his yesh l'livnes is again, when he says sheikish zu, so he only is borrowing this sheikish for the limitation as long as it's a sheikish. Once it's no longer a sheikish, so then the borrowing is off. Mashenkin, when he says lend me a sheikish, and he lent him a sheikish, so this sheikish, even though it's broke and no longer a sheikish, but nevertheless he could rebuild it and make it into a sheikish. Amar le hashileni mekem sheikish, lend me a place to make a sheikish. Is economy adamashal if there was a Maisa Kinyan, in other words, in a place there has to be a Maisa Kinyan. On this, in other words, there's no item. He's lending him a place to make a sheikish. The economy adamashal if there was a Maisa Kinyan from the mashal that he's lending him a place for the sheikish. Is that a yashoyel boina v'hoyel b'karka hamashal ad shetavel yod sheikish she'efshel lahashkis mimenu behemti. So he has a right to go ahead and build on the karka of the mashal something which would be called a sheikish. Lahashkis mimenu behemte, either to irrigate, to give water to his behema, a yartse, or to irrigate his karka, kameshisner mamashal. Whatever the deal was with the mashal. So in other words, there's a musig of borrowing karka, and he's borrowing karka. It's not the normal din of a shayl, which we learned the din of a shayl is not on mechubal karka, but he's borrowing the karka in order to be able to put a sheikus over there. Halacha yud, hashayl pundik mechavere. He borrows a pundik. In other words, there's a place to stay, to sleep, and there's a room to sleep, and he's borrowing this room. So the din is, if it's lelina, he says, I need it lelina. So lelina in pachas miyemechad, which is really what we learned earlier in the Schiros as well. That by Schiros is also lelina in pachas miyemechad. If he said l'shvisa, he's borrowing it l'shvisa. So then is in pachas mishnei yom. If it's l'nesuyim, he's borrowing it l'nesuyim. Is ein pachas mishleishim, which is the same thing by schiros. By schiros you're paying for it, but if you're paying for lina, so it's 1 night shvisa, 2 nights nesuyin is 3 nights, 30 days. Now shol choluk mechaveri leilach beil beis avol. He's borrowing. I said I need to borrow a piece of clothes in order to go visit a beis avol. What does that mean? It means kedei sheyelach v'yazer, the amount of time that it means to go to the beis avol and come back. Now, shaloi lebeis hamishta, if he borrows it to go to the beis hamishta, so then we assume it's not he's going to the beis hamishta, he's coming right back, but rather he's going to be there kol eisiyayim, because in the beis hamishta he's going to spend time in the beis hamishta, more time than in the beis havel. So therefore we assume that it's kol eisiyayim. Shaloi lasis ben mishta shalei, he went ahead and borrowed, says I need to make a mishta, therefore I need a piece of clothes to make a mishta. So then is ein pachas mishaviyam. So borrowing a piece of clothes to make a mishta, so that means that he's borrowing it for 7 days.